Thank you all for joining me here today. And this is the first time I'm doing a book reading / presentation. So we'll see how this rolls, because I'm used to doing like conference presentations, research presentations. So I'll share some of the overview and inspiration. I'll do some readings from the book itself. And we'll do that for about half an hour, 45 minutes. Then we have an art activity, a bookmark making activity that I hope many of you will participate. There's also coffee and snacks for anyone who likes. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am an associate professor and interim chair of the Creative Arts Therapies department, also assistant dean for the Division of Human Development in the College of Nursing and Health Professions. And I want to start with a lot of thank yous. So firstly, thank you to Stacy for organizing this. I think this is sort of like, we're trying this for the first time in the library with an interactive piece and signing with the bookstore. Thank you, bookstore, for being here. And thank you for friends who are here and family who really supported this process. So deeply, deeply grateful.
There'll be something, right?
Should I weave it somewhere else?
No. Try it now.
Okay, so we gathered here to talk about this book. Right? This is a book that has been swimming in my head for, I would say, almost 10 years. And I made a promise to myself when I saw many of my colleagues publishing books. I was like, you know what? I don't have anything to say yet. And I'm not going to do a book till I have something solid to say. And it was, I think, in 2018, I went to a keynote in Utah, and the organizer there asked me if I had a book that summarized all the work that I've been doing. And I said no. And it sort of motivated me to start thinking about how to consolidate a lot of abstruse, a lot of jargon-filled research for a lay audience. So this is really my goal, is to communicate some of the research that sits in journals, sits in conferences, to bring it to a interested public. And I'd like to welcome Dean Gitlin, because she was one of the first people to really encourage me on this track. And she's on the back cover as endorsing. And thank you again for being here full circle with this event. So why, right? Like, why do this? I had 4 reasons for writing this book. The first was to dispel the idea that creativity is a domain of a gifted few. This is an assumption. I hear this all the time in our research and our clinical practice. People will say, well, I'm not creative. And I will say, that's not possible. This is the defining feature of being human, is that we are creative and we're imaginative. No other species is, and I'll get to that in a bit. But that was reason number 1. Reason number 2 was to democratize this idea of self-expression. Again, in modern society, we've come to this idea that there's some people who are really creative and artistic. Let them do the things that they do and let us all watch them. And I said, no, wait a second. We all have that capacity. We all have capacity for creativity and expression. Let's maybe tap into that. Let's allow us to tap into that source of well-being and health. I want to then share with you how creative expression can help us through really difficult times. So when we are going through adversity, we've been through traumatic experiences, the capacity to create is something that helps us cope and cope effectively. And lastly, I'll share some examples. In part 4, I share some examples of how we can integrate this, how you can sort of tap into self-expression as a source of well-being in everyday life. Are you trying to? So the book is organized in 4 parts. The first part is on theories and sort of ideas around self-expression. And my husband started reading the book after it was published, because he was not allowed to look at it before. And he said, oh my God, your first 3 chapters are so dense. So tell everybody to start reading from chapter 4. And so those of you who find chapters 1 to 3 dense, start reading from chapter 4. So part One is really a lot of theory. Part two is the neurobiology of self-expression. How does the brain and body connect to help us express ourselves? Part three is really around adversity and trauma, and part four is around implications around health and well-being, right? Okay, so I'm going to read one of the motivations and perceptions related to part one. But Van Gogh cut off his ear. How can creative expression be related to health? This is a question I've actually got in real life. What do you mean arts and health are connected? Somebody cut off his ear. It's hard to argue for the helpful aspects of artistic and creative self-expression when pop culture examples of questionable behaviors by artists abound. In popular culture, the common perception is that artists live on the margins or outside of social virtues and norms. This is the tale of Gauguin, who abandoned his family and treated Tahitian girls poorly in the pursuit of his artistic practice. There is justifiable concern about Picasso's abuse and mistreatment of the women in his life. How might we refer to arts and health when the now beloved Van Gogh was known to cut off his ear in a fit of fury? Who has not, at some time, considered artsy individuals to be overly emotional, insubordinate, licentious, unpredictable, and or flaky? I tell you, these are all words I have heard directly myself, right? This is pop culture assumption. Hopefully, by reading this book, you'll change your mind. So as a clinician and researcher, a refrain I hear often is that I'm not creative. A patient once told me that he stopped making art in school when his teacher told him, "You are no Leonardo." This man was in his early 70s, who had held this belief his entire life. I felt incredibly sad when I heard that. Why do we hold these heartbreaking self-perceptions when we know that we are all capable of creative and adaptive problem solving on a daily basis? More importantly, why do we let these stereotypes of creative expression diminish our spirit of curiosity and exploration? If we are not a Leonardo or a Picasso, does that mean we are not permitted to make art and engage in creative play and exploration? This attitude is not fair or democratic to the human spirit, and certainly not reflective of the history of human creative expression. Right. So what are some defining features of the human condition? So I explained in part one that uncertainty, for one, is a defining feature. We can talk about our past, we can talk about our present, but uncertainty is a given. None of us can really, truly know what lies ahead, moment to moment. We might predict, but we can really not know, right? It's a defining feature. We also have predictive brains, which means that our brains are constantly sort of imagining the future such that it can prepare you to survive. This is the one mission of our brain, to keep you alive moment to moment. So what we are doing with this condition of uncertainty is we imagining possibilities. Sometimes this works really well because you can problem solve and anticipate. Like today, maybe you check the weather and you to carry an umbrella. That's your brain sort of doing this predictive piece. But it can also work against us when we get really anxious. Maybe we over-predict negative outcomes, or we are unable to imagine a future at all when we are really depressed. All these are natural parts of our human brain. That imaginative condition is who we are. We can't help ourselves, right? We're also fueled by emotion. We'd like to think we are these rational, thoughtful beings, but that's just the very small part of our functioning. We are led, we are defined by our emotions. And we hold it together somehow, but we are truly and deeply led by our emotions, again, as a survival approach. And I use this example of fire to highlight that when we are able to channel this really powerful source within us, we get things like pottery, right? So if you can channel fire, and you can use it effectively, you get pottery, you get candlelight. But if you're not able to control, you're not able to regulate, you get forest fires. So, really think of emotions as this powerful source within us, and what we do with it shapes our lives. And lastly, we can't help ourselves. We are wired to be part of a community. We are wired to belong. We are defined by our connections to our tribes because deep, deep inside, we are still the old hunter-gatherers that we were tens of thousands of years ago. Our basic brain biology has not changed. So our need to belong, and this is not a bad thing, our need to belong is a way to protect ourselves. When we have people who around us, who understand us, and we can be fully expressive with them in every way, it helps us feel less alone, less isolated. So as I mentioned, creative expression is uniquely human. Animals might make things, but it's more of a survival instinct, making a nest or, creating a burrow. That's not necessarily imaginative and expressive as it is for humans. Great. And again, why does any of this matter? Because when we are not able to express ourselves, we get physically sick. There's evidence for this increasingly, and we see this even more sort of and I see this all the time now with COVID and the forced isolation. I really think it broke us as a society. It broke our connections. It broke our sense of sort of feeling safe. I feel like we all sort of floated away as islands with COVID. So I'm really happy we're able to be here in person and increasingly meet each other, connect in a real way. Because it matters. It's how we understand safety in the brain. It's how we understand a sense of belonging and community. So how is self-expression different from artistic expression, right? So we all know what it's like to vent. We all vent to our friends and family, things we struggle with. How is that different from artistic expression? So the difference here is that when you express yourself and you wrap it up in a metaphor, could be a visual metaphor, musical metaphor, drama, poetry, it kind of contains that and helps you communicate with others. So this is why you can relate to a piece of art from 2000 years ago. You can relate to a piece of poetry from hundreds of years ago because the emotions are still the same. However, they've been contained in this art form that helps you understand. So, think about sadness, think about our basic sort of emotions, anger, sadness. Someone might have vented 200 years ago, but when it's put into a poem or when it's put into a painting, you see it. You can connect with someone who clearly doesn't even live anymore. This is the sort of transcendent and powerful connection of art forms. Everybody still with me? Right, so I'll move now to the neurobiology because this is new. This is sort of connecting to modern scientific research in arts and health, right? So the dominance of the visual systems in the brain. This is in part 2. Human beings have relied on the visual sense more than any other because over millennia, the sense of sight has helped us survive by alerting us to danger and leading us to resources that could help us thrive. It is well established that the visual and oral systems are the most developed of our senses, more so than those of smell, taste, and touch. Visual systems are hypothesized to have become a dominant sense, especially because human beings evolved to be upright and could see considerable distances. As a result, visual processing became the leading source of information about human experiences and mental states and now consumes the largest proportion of brain resources. So our sound systems take up about 3% of our brain power, but the visual system takes up over 55 to 60%. It is a huge, huge component of how we make sense of the world, more so than any other. I'll show you a quick example of a study that we had done with virtual reality and fragrance. And we tracked brain activity and brain resources. And what we found was when someone engaged in a creative condition, that was the natural state compared to a tracing rote condition, which highlights this idea that creative expression is our natural baseline state. So if anyone says to you, I'm not creative, tell them, you know what, I saw this presentation where it demonstrated that creative Expression is our natural state. To be doing rote and boring tasks is actually deeply, deeply unnatural to us. We are wired to be creative. Right. So now let me tell you about my favorite hormones. There is such a thing. So there's 4 hormones that are really connected, and there's evidence around this for arts and health broadly. Dopamine is the hormone related to completing tasks as well as reward perceptions. So when you're anticipating something exciting, when you're imagining something, it's your dopamine in action. Serotonin is more the hormone of contentment and fulfillment, often connected to repetitive tasks that you enjoy. So you go for a walk, you're doing the same thing again and again. You're having this experience, your serotonin levels are rising. You might be knitting or you might be doodling, the serotonin level will rise. Oxytocin is often referred to as the love hormone or the bonding hormone. It is, but it also has a dark side. Just like oxytocin is released with mothers and babies as a form of bonding, it's also released in tribal sort of connections. So oxytocin levels are really high during wartime because it helps you bond against a threat. So when people tell you, oh, I love hormone, it has its darks. And lastly, there's endorphins, which are our natural painkillers in the body. Released when we laugh, released when we are amused by a joke, released when we cry, and released with spicy food. All these fun things going on in our body. All right. So the third piece that I wanted to sort of actually should say part 3. The third piece that I wanted to really highlight in this book is the role of creativity in response to adversity. So this is a lot of my professional work as an art therapist and art therapy researcher, where we worked with military populations, with oncology patients, also with children who are HIV/AIDS orphans, to understand what it is about creative expression that helps as a protective factor. So this is a study we did in Malawi, Africa, a few years ago. And these are children, they are painting with feathers, and many of them are orphaned due to HIV and AIDS. And a big push in this project was to move away from artistic expression as a sort of product-based approach, where you create a pretty picture, to, hey, let's talk about what's going on today. What does this color mean for you today? Let's move away from creating pretty pictures to using art as a way to communicate whatever is going on. I'm distressed today. I'm happy today. I'm struggling today. It's a way to communicate. And when we don't have words, and very often with children who are struggling, they don't have words, this becomes a way to communicate, right? So I'm going to share an example. And this is related to my 7-year-old, and she'll be mortified that I mentioned her. So one day, we were all sitting together reading and doing homework during the quarantine of COVID-19. I turned to check in on my then 9-year-old schoolwork. I saw that instead of doing her math problems, she was doodling on her math workbook. Above a page full of math sums, she was drawing a butterfly. It helped me think, she explained. The butterfly just had to come out. I laughed because I knew exactly what she meant. The essence of what she shared was that the desire to get something out that is locked within us. Doodling has been stigmatized in the modern world, but in reality, it's a powerful tool to combat a range of mental states, including boredom, distractedness. And it has been found to improve memory and recall. So the next time you're doodling and someone says something snarky, there's more research to back up, so doodle away. So in the study in Malawi, for example, the children who engaged in this intervention, which was art space, showed significantly more improvement than those who did not. So the red bar shows the improvement in 5-year-olds, in the 5-year-olds. We've also done a lot of stuff with the military, examining art therapy as an intervention. And what was found was that service members who used metaphors in their artwork, who were able to identify with their military unit, showed significantly lower PTSD symptoms as well as anxiety symptoms. And you'll see it's
Wow.
it's a way to channel, right? So when you put your frustrations into something like artistic work, you're less likely to take it out interpersonally. You're less likely to be violent, aggressive, abusive interpersonally because the art materials can absorb that, it can externalize and handle the range of emotions that we have. And we all have a range, right? Positive and negative. All right, so lastly, how does this all relate to us? Right? What does this mean for me? So and I get asked this question a lot. Well, I'm not an artist, or I'm not a musician, and I'm not actively creative. What do I do? How do I make use of this? So there's many different ways, I believe, to think about self-expression. And distraction is not a bad thing. So sometimes when we are in the thick of a struggle or a challenge, the first response, it might be that you just step away and it's like, you know what, I can't deal with this right now. I have to distract myself. I go for a walk, maybe I watch TV, maybe I read something, I doodle, maybe I knit, but that's okay. You're separating yourself from the challenge. Then when you have the energy and the capacity, you're like, okay, how do I redirect this? How do I make sense of this difficult experience I've had and see how I can integrate it into my life story, into my story of overcoming challenges and making it through to the next, right? So challenges are thrown at us all the time. And you know that, right? And there's no getting away from that. Life is stressful, challenges are going to come at us all the time. If we don't learn, and if we don't learn to process our responses as well as strategies for the future, we'll constantly be knocked down by the very same challenges. So this expressive approach really helps us. It's a problem-solving strategy. And lastly, once we've sort of had some distance from the experience, it helps us to revisit, reframe, and say, all right, and there's a saying, right? Like the same experience will keep coming at you till you've processed it, made sense of it. The lesson will be repeated till it's learned. And life sort of works that way, throwing at us challenges our way. All right. Let's see, there's one more piece I wanted to. My purpose in writing this book was to make the idea of creative self-expression democratic and accessible, to recognize and accept the superpower that is innate in us all as an attribute of being human. Our adult selves are founded on our developmental experiences. Although we have the capacity to change our lives, in many ways, the developmental years of childhood and youth form the structure of our lives, including our worldview, self-perceptions, and approaches to challenges and ongoing stressors in life. No child is without stressors, and stressors are the essential source of resistance that we need to grow our muscles of resilience and strength. That said, there is eustress, which strengthens us, and distress, which can be developmentally hurtful and unhelpful. When they occur during the developmental years, adversities like illness, death, injury, violence, abuse, and trauma can fundamentally alter perceptions of self and complicate perceptions of danger and safety in self and others. Perceptions of adaptive and maladaptive responses are often complex and complicated, especially in non-normative developmental contexts of adversity. In the developmental years, children and youth are still growing, and the brain is not fully matured until the mid-20s. This period, therefore, offers opportunity to embed resilience and help children and youth learn tools and strategies to manage and process experiences as they approach emerging adulthood. So, should you have children and youth in your lives, I would really encourage supporting this idea of expression and providing tools so they have something to go to as a coping strategy. All right, so for the futures, what does all this mean, right? So I shared with you that our brains are really tens of thousands of years old still. We're still in our hunter-gatherer brain. That hasn't changed all that much. Our emotions are still the same. Our need for self-expression is the same. Our need for someone who sees us and witnesses us for who we are is the same. And our drive for creative problem solving and the joy and beauty is the same. What will change, though, is our tools and modes of expression. What will change is our witnesses and audience. And what will change is our ways of storing and archiving. So, for example, on the left is a book that my dad wrote in the 1960s. He handwrote it. And my mother, I think, rewrote it for the publisher. 40 years later, my generation, everything was on a laptop. Everything was on a computer. I don't know if my husband would have handwritten the manuscript. But that's a sort of generational difference. But the idea is still the same. The books are still the same. The way we express and communicate our ideas might change. Also, our audiences are changing. So even 20, 30 years ago, this is how we communicated, person to person. We went to a museum, we went to a show. Now there's alternative selves. We have ourselves online, we have artwork online, we have music online. So there's many different ways we are seeing each other, many different ways we are sharing. So that whole piece has completely changed. Those who see us might not always be the ones who are with us in physical proximity. The ones who might know us best may or may not be the people right next to us, as it was even 15, 20 years ago. Big shift for us. And I'm not quite sure what that means just yet. In many ways, it's a good thing. But in other ways, I think there's a risk of disembodiment, which we not really fully figured out. We have artificial intelligence creating artwork now, which is kind of cool. But I think there's still, the meaning making is still by us. So there might be image generators, but the associations and the connections we feel are still generated from us. All right, so that's all I have for today. Thank you for coming. If there's any questions, I'm happy to ask them. And yeah, maybe we'll pause for questions a bit.
Just thanks for writing the book.
Oh my God. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, and thank you for starting me on this journey for sure. Yeah.
So I just have to say that this is an amazingly well-written, beautiful book. First, I want to congratulate the family, because writing a book is a family affair. So congratulations. And it's really beautiful, the writing, and I am learning so much. And first I learned that I'm human and therefore I'm creative. And seriously, and I just find your statement about creativity as a baseline state very empowering. And I think the work is deeply personal, yet has incredible societal and policy implications that I keep seeing different stages of my life in this book. And as I read it, I am just learning about different things. So it doesn't, you have to go back to it many times. I just want to say that you have to go back to it many times because it's so full of important information and knowledge, and the way you put it all together in terms of the biological to the emotional to the societal to the context is just really very beautiful. And congratulations.
Thank you.
And my question is, what do you see next for you? Is there a book two? Is there?
There already is. No, there already is. We started a second book, and that's really focused on children. And it's building on the work that we did in Malawi, this is more around, the thing that really struck me was that we have to intervene, or we have to offer children tools. Because I can't remember who said this, but it's easier to support a child than to fix a broken adult. And I'm not saying it right. There's a person who said it more poetically and more beautifully, but the wiring is very fluid when we are young. And if we can offer tools, if we can offer strategies, if we can make it safe for children to really be comfortable with the range of human experience and emotion, and that it's okay, and there's ways to channel it, we are giving them lifelong tools. And I'm just convinced, especially with COVID and post-COVID, like self-regulation is a fundamental, deeply needed tool. It'll help you get through anything. And creative self-expression allows for that, for self-regulation. When you're struggling, when you're isolated, if you have a way to communicate, if you have a way to make music, write, draw, like, do drama, all those things help you contain these difficult experiences, help you connect and make choices that are adaptive rather than maladaptive. So we're really focusing on strategies with this particular organization, Save the Children, that I've worked with around the world, on how we are helping children and youth all over the world have these strategies. And they don't have to be expensive. We've been doing this as human beings for as long as human civilization has existed. Every community has its own artistic practice. We can absolutely tap into that. So we're working on a second book, and my kids are like, what? Oh my God, please say no. And I'm like, sorry, you really are. So yeah, thank you for, yeah, it's sent to society in a different way, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's, yeah, so it's a lot. And honestly, I wrote this as each chapter is an independent essay. So if you feel like, this chapter doesn't speak to me, you can skip to a different one. Hopefully it'll still make sense. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation. In one of the slides, you mentioned that an imagination can be negative imaginations, and that creates a really depressive attitude among people.
Yeah.
So if you see some people doing that negative imagination, which actually goes to the opposite to creative works, in fact, it results in destructive environments. So what are your strategies in case when you see something like this? How do you stop someone to imagine negatively?
So firstly, I wouldn't. So I think, again, it's negative thinking is, again, our natural state. Why? Because our brain, again, wants to imagine everything that's going to come at us and kill us. So it wants to be prepared. So our natural instinct is to pay attention to the negative. That's our survival mode. So we actually have to work really hard to see the positive. A way to do that, I think, is to sort of practice gratitude every day. You have to work really hard to notice, because that's not what our instincts are to notice. Our instincts are to notice, okay, what is coming at me? And you can get really bogged down with that. My older daughter refers to this as the power of negative thinking. She'll say, well, let me imagine the worst, because usually things will never be that bad. So again, what we do with our imagination is in our control. So I think to resist the way our thoughts move is not necessarily helpful, but to observe and understand them is helpful. So why am I thinking only of the negative? Am I thinking only of the negative? Sometimes it's prudent to think of the negative, right? There's something called toxic positivity. That's not helpful either. You want to get a bit of a reality check, but in that, also not fail to notice the positive, simple things. Notice beauty around us every day. Even on a miserable rainy day like this, you could look at your window and you could see the drops and how beautiful and symmetrical they are. Noticing beauty, pausing to notice beauty is another way to counter that. There's food in this room, but enjoy the coffee. We'll do an art experiential after this. Come make a bookmark. All those are ways to sort of counter what would be catastrophic thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, it helps, but sometimes you know that that person is really negative, and you are not able to stop that person.
Yeah.
That person could be in your family. That could be a good friend of yours.
Yeah.
And you internally feel sad that you are not able to do anything for that person. So that's a
Yeah, and I think that's where it's really important to, and I call this the home improvement analogy. Right? Sometimes people need professional help. So there's only so much we can do for ourselves. You have a headache, you have a Tylenol. But if you have other more serious clinical conditions, you do need medical help. The analogy I think of at home is you can change a light bulb, you can paint a room. But if your plumbing is not working, your electrical system is not working, you should get professional help. So there's definitely a point beyond which, and that's what my day job is about. It's being a creative arts therapist. And you might actually do more harm if you try to fix the plumbing and the electric without being licensed to do so. So that clinical piece is really, really important. Yeah.
Do you think that because I feel like as a society talking more about mental health on a daily life, do you think that we would also be talking about expressive creativity more heavily like in the future, just because I feel like the younger generations are speaking way more about mental health and what they deal with, and they're actively trying to help out their mental health. So do you see kind of this just progressing in the future, just as more creativity involved with like mental health therapy, things like that?
I hope so. And I'm so glad you brought it up because there are so many digital tools now, right? With the phone filters and Instagram and TikTok, and people can sort of put their creativity out there, expression out there. I really hope so. Like the World Health Organization says that 1 in 3 people will need mental health care in their lifetime. That's 1/3 of the world's population. That's huge. So one, you don't have the mental health care force to take care of that. And I think just naming it, and I'm so glad you brought it up, is hopefully going to help. And destigmatizing the many different ways to seek help and help ourselves.
Yeah, I have another question because you triggered it. And that is, I always ask like, why now? Like why this book is so important now? And I was wondering if you could just think, what your thoughts are about that because of, it could be because of technology and advancements and so forth, that we've lost the understanding that we are innately creative, or other historical forces are such that it's brought us to a point where now you have to take us back and say, wait a minute, and one of the things I found striking about the book is the many different strategies you weave in throughout to be creative. There isn't just one way. It could be as simply, just as you said, the raindrops going back to, to nature in so many ways. But just like, so historically, like we've lost those connections. I was just wondering if you have any reflections on that.
I think COVID has a big part in this. I wrote the book proposal when we shut down for COVID.
I see.
And I said, oh my God, like, here we are sitting with ourselves in our homes, isolated. But gosh, I had more appreciation for my backyard than I ever did before. To notice the little things, to notice, the skies, to really pay attention to our sensory environment in a way that we hadn't. And it has always bothered me that we separated out. And I think it's a very Western and modern thing where we've separated out, like, let's go for a show, let's go to the museum, and put creative practice outside of who we are. And it's unique to, I think, the visual arts especially, because we don't put that pressure on ourselves when we cook or we walk. We don't say that, oh gosh, I have to be an Olympic level walker to walk. No, I don't have to be a, Michelin star chef to cook. We cook. So I'm trying to think of this as the same way. We did a lot of that during COVID. I think people just sort of went into their spaces and became more creative. There were people sharing things online, singing across. If you remember that video of this community in Italy. People were singing across their balconies. This is who we are. And I think COVID really highlighted that for me, that somehow we've just gotten unhealthily disconnected from our creative and expressive capacities and said that, that is for someone else. Why? This is absolutely for each of us. So I would say really find and think about what you enjoyed as a kid. What did you enjoy doing? What did you enjoy making? And maybe go back to that, because as children, we were not so worried about external perceptions and am I good enough? If you enjoy something, photography, writing, gardening, culinary arts, there's creative potential in all these activities. I would say go for it. All right.
Well, maybe a comment and maybe a question. I think all of us, we're very proud that at home, especially that you came out with this book, and it has it's been an eye opener to all of us in terms of what you actually do. It's not theoretical anymore. It is a lot of context to it, and the depth to which you go. So thank you for that. The question I had was, where in the evolutionary chain did creativity creep in? Do we have an understanding of that? And is it? I know you use the sentence many times that to be human is to be creative. Does creativity manifest itself to that great an extent in terms of the other species, in terms of the other animals?
So there is evidence that there was something very different between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. That's where the big brain shift happened. And that's where evidence of things like cave paintings came to be. So this external representation of our inner lives really started with Homo sapiens. So there's sort of physical evidence for that. And the capacity, so Homo sapien brains are bigger, more connections. The capacity to predict and prepare was a huge evolutionary advantage. So those who could anticipate or expect challenges were better equipped to deal with those challenges. And that's what our Homo sapien brains have given us. That is the extent to which I could, speak about the change, as opposed to being reactive to predators or threats, which is what most animals do. We are different in that we can hopefully anticipate what a threat would be and what that could potentially do for us. Yeah.
I just want to share one more thing. I really like the way you described how you took the COVID experience to really self-expression of your own creativity through your writings. And one of the things I did myself to devote some time in writing a poetry. Right, so I cannot paint. My drawing is not so good. So
you should hang out with us. We'll make sure we change that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
In fact, in school, when I was in India at school, and in the drawing class, I couldn't do. In the painting class, I couldn't do. Actually, I spilled the paint on the table. So my teacher got really mad at me because you didn't paint, you just wasted the paint. But then I had this feeling that I could write well. So I spent some time writing some creative expressions in poetry, and I used to walk. Other thing that I did was walk on my neighborhood, especially in spring and summer when lot of different types of flowers were growing around, observing the flowers, colors of flowers, and that gave me the sense there's so much diversity within this nature, and we can use this as a kind of self experience in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember, you had asked a whole bunch of us to create videos during COVID, right? And so many faculty referred to that, exactly that, to be in nature again. The nature's the source of all our metaphors. It's again a place where we feel stimulated in a way that is not exhausting, that's not overwhelming. Our old hunter-gatherer brains are happy, and beauty in nature is a reminder of health, of wellness, of harmony, of fertility, all of that. So thank you for sharing. We have bookmarks if you would like to make. This is the interactive part. Anything else, Stacey?
There would be questions in chat, so.
Okay. Are there?
Now they're.
Okay, great. Our friends from the bookstore are here. If you'd like a copy, I'm happy to sign. And we have the bookmark set up in the back. So if you want to grab one and work on it, we can help you with that. So thank you so much for coming today.